How's it going, PengPirates Crew? It's Adrian, and we're back with another video. So as you can see, I'm finally back from vacation, back from Anime Expo in Philippines, so I'm going to be making videos again. Also, sorry for the false alarm on the upload. I got sick literally like right after I made that YouTube community post, which is like super unfortunate, but we're recovering, we're back from it now. So I wanted to do like an OP3 overview, but with regionals coming up, I just really want to get into like the deck specific videos, and then we'll learn more about the meta as I'm kind of making gameplay videos for you guys. So that's kind of the structure that I'm going to be going with as OP3 kind of unfolds. But yeah, let's jump right into the video. Today we're talking about Katakuri, so why don't we first talk about and establish what Katakuri does as a leader. So as a refresher, when attacking, if Katakuri has a Dawn under him, he's going to be able to look at the top life from either his own or his opponent's life, and then he could then return it to the top or put it to the bottom of, the respective owner's life. And then on top of this, he's also going to gain plus 1000 power for the battle. And this is one of the better leader skills that we've seen from the OP3 leaders. You're gaining plus 1000 power for one Dawn, so you're swinging for 7k just, for no reason, pretty much for free. And 7k is such an efficient number to swing at because, most leaders are at 5k power. So just being able to, warrant 2 cards out of their hand is really nice. And then on top of that, being able to look at your life and kind of plan around it and play around more information than your opponent has is really useful. And this is like one of the best strengths of Katakuri, right? Is that you're able to just play around your opponent's life while also swinging for this really efficient 7k each turn. You end up getting a lot of mileage throughout the game just playing with this leader skill. So now that we've established what Katakuri as a leader does, what makes the entire deck so strong, right? Because to understand how to beat the deck, we need to also understand what are these deck's strong points and are there any weak points that we could exploit, right? So first one, I won't really explain this. It's just the efficient leader swinging 7k is super annoying against a lot of decks. When you're being swung at 7k, usually the only two options you really have that being able to swing 7k this early, it's like I either have to take the life, which I don't really want to do against Katakuri because I might end up needing this life, in the future if they burn my life, or you're just going to spend 2 cards or, like an event card to block it, which is also not very favorable. Also, Katakuri, of course, comes from yellow, which has just like the most insane trigger effects. And we're going to talk about these effects a lot more in detail when we look at, what cards make this deck strong. But just being able to cheat out characters basically for free, gaining life from some of these trigger effects, popping a 5 cost with Thunderbolt, it's just so much insane triggers happening all at once. And it could oftentimes feel like if the Katakuri just rolls really well on their life, there's really nothing you could do in the game. Also, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think yellow is the only archetype to have healing in the game. And healing in this game can actually be incredibly strong because it's not like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or like Digimon where the excess power from a character translates into damage to your leader. It doesn't matter if that swing is a 5k or a 20k, right? It's only going to deal 1 damage unless they have something like double attack. So in the late game, when you can threaten these big attacks, most of the time it doesn't really matter because all it really comes down to is how many hits can I survive against my opponent. And being able to like heal from your life and gain, this is 1 extra hit I can take is super useful, especially in the late game. On top of this, yellow has some of the most busted power plays that we've ever seen. Dropping 7 cost Mom already creates like a 1 card deficit between you and your opponent. 8 cost Katakuri is able to remove an 8 cost, which is insane. It removes so many things from the game. And then on top of that, it doesn't have to be only removal, right? If you have something like a Shirahoshi on your board, bouncing it back into your life to heal 1 and gain a busted trigger is also a really strong play to do. And then of course you have something like 10 cost Big Mom, which is one of the most impactful 10 costs that we've ever seen in the game. Just being able to create a 2 card deficit as well as just have like a 12k swing on board is absolutely insane. Between 10 cost Big Mom, 8 cost Katakuri, and then also the SRs in this deck, like 4 cost Katakuri is a good comeback tool, as well as the double attack Cracker is really great. This deck has surprisingly a lot of comeback potential, and if you aren't prepared to swing at your opponent at the right times, Oftentimes, like if you misplace your aggression, the Katakuri can just use these big bomb cards like 7-drop Big Mom, 10-drop Big Mom, and like 8-cost Katakuri and just completely take over the game, especially if you're playing something like Zoro where a lot of your attackers are just like weenie attackers. They could easily just clear your board and just swarm the board with these big threats. So this deck ends up having a lot of comeback potential, especially when you get the defensive triggers like Ikoku Sovereignty and then also the Brûlés for extra blockers. In the late game, they're going to be swinging for huge numbers because they're going to have things like 8-cost Katakuri, which is an 8k, you know, even 7-cost Big Moms an 8k, and then of course 10-cost Big Mom are 12k swings. And then also on the topic of, you know, the cards that they run, this deck's game plan is very effective and it's incredibly easy to play. Your end goal is very simple. You just want to be playing the 10-cost Big Mom and you want to survive enough so that you could just get as many swings as possible to kill your opponent, right? And because of that, your decision making ends up being very simple, right? Because the only things that you really need to consider are what cards do I need to discard when I get like a character trigger? Can I use like Ikoku Sovereignty as a trigger, or should I use it as like a counter? And again, because of this, like the decisions aren't that difficult to make. It's just how can I get to playing the 10-cost Big Mom and then closing out the game right after. So now that we've kind of gone over their strengths in general, I'm going to go really in depth and just talk about the cards in yellow that make these strategies possible. If you feel like you already know what every card does and you have a good grasp on their effects and how to play around them, go ahead and skip to this part of the video and head straight to where I start talking about how to exploit the weaknesses of yellow. But for the rest of us, let's go ahead and start talking about the other cards, starting off with their powerful bombs. All right, so these are going to be the on-curve cards that I was talking about, which are so powerful. Starting off with 7-cost Big Mom. So she's a 7-cost 8k, which is pretty good on stats, but on play, she's going to give your opponent a choice. Your opponent can either trash the top of their life, or they can give you a life by putting the top card of your deck on top of your life area. So either way, she's creating a 1-card deficit. In my opinion, it's almost always better to burn the life on the receiving end of this, because giving the Katakuri a life is potentially super dangerous, and prolonging the game against yellow isn't really advised. And if your deck runs like any sort of blockers or high counter cards, that's just what you need to rely on instead. Next, we got 8-drop Katakuri. This card is absolutely insane, and he has an on-play effect of being able to put a character card on the top or bottom of your or your opponent's life. And this is extremely useful on your opponent because you could use it to remove like high cost cards, which is great. But this is also really potentially good on his side, right? Because he can attack with something like a Perospero or like a Smoothie, and then he could put it back to the top of his life if he needs it. This is going to give him pretty much an extra life for free. And then also like the forbidden combo is pretty much using Katakuri to put Shirahoshi back on the top of the life, and doing that is just absolutely insane because not only does it give him an extra life, it also gives him an extra card on top of that. So yeah, 8-drop Katakuri is just extremely powerful. You need to expect and play around this card on curve, again by being aggressive the turn before this drop, so they'll have a lot harder of a time dealing with your board. And then of course, the best card in yellow that you can run is 10-cost Big Mom. So she's a 10-cost 12k, so premium stat line for that. And then on top of that, her on-play effect is basically 7-cost Big Mom, but you get both of the effects. So what's going to end up happening is you are going to heal 1 life, and then your opponent is going to burn 1 life. So it creates a 2-card deficit, which is huge for coming back later on in the game. And then God forbid if you're ahead and then playing this on some poor soul, because they'll be behind even more. This is the card that is going to put you on a clock against yellow, so you want to make sure the turn before they can drop this, you are just fully swinging, fully being aggressive, because this is going to take all of their dawn. It's going to take their entire turn to play out. So it's good to be aggressive with your characters the turn before, so they have a really hard time getting rid of your board, because you are going to really need to follow up with a strong turn after this 10-drop comes out. All right, so then let's move on to the offensive triggers. I'm not going to spend too much time on these. They honestly do very marginally different things. So just know they all have the trigger of you may discard 1 card and then play this card from your life. So they're all going to be a base 5k attacker with different effects. So Perospero is going to be able to search a Big Mom Pirates card from the top 3 cards of your deck. This is only on KO, so when he gets knocked out. Smoothie's effect honestly doesn't come into play too much. She's going to gain plus 2000 power during the battle if you take 1 of your life. And honestly, this isn't going to be relevant unless you're swinging for game. And lastly, for Cracker, if he has a Dawn under him, he's going to gain plus 1000 power and then also gain double attack if you have less life than your opponent. And also keep in mind that Cracker gains this plus 1000 also during your opponent's turn. It's a continuous effect. But yeah, these are the offensive triggers that you need to worry about. When you're swinging into yellow, I would just consider what is the best plan of action if one of these triggers comes about. These are probably going to be the most common triggers because most decks run all of these cards at 4. Alright, so now let's talk about some defensive triggers. These are going to be the much more dangerous ones in my opinion because they really mess with how the game works because they usually manipulate the amount of hits that you can deal. So first, I want to talk about Ikoku Sovereignty. This is our run-of-the-mill like 2-cost counter event, except for instead of 4000 power, it's just going to have plus 5000 power with like no other effect. And this is really powerful, but honestly, as a counter event, it kind of sucks. For the most part, I wouldn't really play around this because hitting 5000 over something is probably not efficient for you to do anyways. So just hitting into magic numbers is probably enough, honestly. But what you really need to worry about is that trigger effect, especially when going for game, because on trigger, they can discard 2 cards from their hand and then add up to 1 life from the top of their deck onto the top of their life area. So they're basically healing 1, and on top of that, they could just discard using cards they can't counter with, like an 8-drop or 7-drop or 10-drop. And what this does is it allows them to turn their dead cards in hand into just straight up life, which is really messed up. So when you're going for game, you really need to understand like if they have Ikoku Sovereignty, is that something that you can play around by limiting the cards that they have in hand, or are you gonna have to kind of like take a gamble or take another turn to kill them because it's really not worth it for you to trigger and go all in. Moving on to our next event, we got Thunderbolt. So this is a 2-cost event that allows them to take a life. So by using this, they're going to take 1 damage, and they have to take that 1 damage. It's mandatory. So they have to have at least 1 life while using Thunderbolt. They can't use this on 0 life. What that's going to allow them to do is KO a 5-cost character. So this is pretty useful. It might come up sometimes, especially against Whitebeard, but yellow players are mainly going to use this for this trigger effect because as you can see for the trigger effect, it gives you that 5-cost KO just for free, no life needed. And what this does is you have to be very careful when swinging with your characters against yellow because it kind of reverses how you think about swing order. Sometimes people like to swing with their leader first and then, test the waters out with their characters. But I actually think that if you are going to be plausibly dealing damage to yellow, you should be swinging with your characters first. And again, this is because like, let's say if you have a 5-cost Marco on board that you're planning on swinging with, if you swing with your leader first and they end up triggering something like a Thunderbolt, then you're in such a bind, right? Because they're going to be able to KO your character. And the scenario I came up with isn't too bad. You could revive the Marco, but let's say it's like a Basil Hawkins or something, and then you just lose a 5-cost for free. And this is especially important when you're swinging for game, because especially when you're swinging for game, you want to be considering like, should I be swinging with my characters first? Because you might lose an extra hit by getting this Thunderbolt triggered on you. And then the last one is Brûlé. I'm not going to spend too much time on this because we've seen this type of card printed before, but yeah, this is just a 3-cost 1k blocker. With the trigger effect, play this card. I would be particularly careful of this card swinging for game against Katakuri because some Katakuri players will just put this at the bottom of their life. So, when you're going for lethal, just keep in mind that the last life or the second last life can be a Brûlé, and do you have countermeasures to kind of minimize that? All right, so now that we've kind of talked about the strengths of yellow, what cards make the strengths possible, now we're going to focus on, what can you do to minimize them and also exploit some weaknesses of yellow. The first thing I'm going to want you guys to do, and I'm begging you to do this, please, is have a game plan for triggers. I cannot tell you how many times I've seen games of like my friends playing or just, games on YouTube where they will attack into yellow and be surprised that they got a certain trigger off. To play against yellow, you need to know what their triggers are and what they do. You also need to have a plan around it. So for example, if I have like a 5-cost Marco on the board, I'm going to swing with the Marco first instead of my leader first, because what if they trigger Thunderbolt, right? If I can go for game in 1 turn and I'm not necessarily in any danger, I also need to account for what if they have Ikoku Sovereignty in trigger? What if they have a Brûlé blocker in trigger as their like last life? So these are just things that you have to be thinking about when you're swinging into yellow, and you have to have some sort of game plan around them or answer to them, or else what's going to end up happening is you are going to keep swinging into them, and then you're going to be like, wait, where did the game go? Why are they in the lead now? Or even worse, you're going to be swinging for game and they trigger something like Ikoku Sovereignty or a Brûlé, and you're going to be like, wait, I need this many swings and I calculated for it, but I didn't calculate for the extra swings that I might need off trigger. And of course, the next point, I've already talked about this so much, set up your aggression before their power turns. So before they can drop that 7 cost Big Mom, the 8 cost Katakuri, 10 cost Big Mom, make sure that you're in the position to be aggressive with your characters on those turns, because then they're going to be forced to either go off of their power curve plays to address your board, or they're going to go with their powerful play but also be potentially very vulnerable, because then they won't be able to control your board after. So just keep in mind, you want your opponent to be uncomfortable when they're making these big Dawn commitment plays. You don't want them to be in a position where they're comfortable in playing these cards. And then also the last point, it's kind of brushing on specific territory, but if your deck runs blockers, just take the life, especially if the Katakuri player is like constantly swinging at your face. You would rather take the life than have it be burned. And then also, when the Katakuri player plays the 7-drop, usually you are just going to want to burn that life away. And the reason for this is because if you end up giving your opponent life, between the 7 cost giving them life and the 8 cost being able to give them life, and then as well as they will just play the 10 cost, your opponent is getting so much life throughout their turns. Like, if they're able to just stall out, they will win the game. Getting into an extended fight against yellow is definitely not advised, because they will eventually win out the game. They're big characters, and just the value they get off of healing is usually going to outscale a lot of decks. So just be careful with giving your opponent the life. Usually, like, I would say, you know, like 85% of the time, you want to just burn the life off of the 7 cost. Alright, so now that we've gone over some in general things to do, I'm going to kind of talk about some color specific things to do against yellow. These are just things that I've seen that have worked out in games, or, you know, through my testing. And if you have like a certain strategy that I missed, feel free to add it in the comment section down below. These videos are all about just like educating each other and getting better at the game. And sometimes I miss things that other people have observed. Alright, so red, you're pretty much going to want to do everything I said in the general thing. You're going to want to rush down their face. You want everything to be uncomfortable for them to play. You want them to be in a position where they can't really defend themselves at like 1 or 0 life. Swing with your characters first. You know, don't miss out on those swings. You have to make every swing count. If you're playing Zoro, especially be aggressive the turn before the bombs. It's so easy to do this with your weenie attackers. And then also, for the most part, it's just a race to 0, baby. Like, just take that life and hope for blockers. You want to save your counter cards for your board so that you could just keep on going with your aggression. You don't really want to counter out of your life too often, because, you know, again, that is a resource for you to take, and if it's going to be burned anyway, you'd rather just take the hit than for it to just be trashed. For blue, you know, blockers are obviously going to be your #1 friend. You know, burn the life when given the choice, but also in blue, try to go wide as possible, especially if you're playing like Doflamingo or Croc. You really want to focus on summoning the Pacifistas, or, you know, summoning your Warlords over summoning something like Mihawk, because let me tell you, Mihawk is not going to save you from 10 cost Mom. I wouldn't advise playing Mihawk unless they specifically have the 7-drop Linlin on board, because once they play the 10 cost Big Mom, as soon as you play the Mihawk, you are going to lose that Mihawk, because they're just going to swing into it with 10 cost Big Mom. In my opinion, it's not all that worth it to play, because it's going to take up your entire turn. It's much more useful to just go wide on your board so that you can keep swinging and keep being aggressive, because one of the biggest weaknesses of yellow is the fact that they don't have a lot of counter. So in between them discarding cards for their trigger effects and, you know, countering out for their board, sometimes you could just kill them from like 3 life, or I've even been killed from like 4 life just because I don't have any counter in hand. So yeah, when you're playing blue, blockers are your best friend. Try to go as wide as possible. Don't rely on the Mihawk like you do in other matchups, and this matchup will be a lot more winnable than you think. For green, if you're playing Kid, the double swing is honestly your biggest win condition. A well-placed double swing and being aggressive in the right times is really going to help you out in this matchup. Sometimes instead of developing your board, it is more beneficial to just double swing on the turn. Because yellow doesn't have too many defensive options, they usually just run the 4 Brûlée and then Ikaku Sovereignty as well. Dropping them down to a low life count to set up for you to just double swing at them is honestly really good. Also, I would really abandon the 8 cost Kid strategy if you run it, because again, the Katakuri could just bounce an 8 cost, so he's just going to end up bouncing it back to your life, and then worst comes to worst, the 10 drop comes in right after and just burns it away. So what I would do is, personally, I would just completely rely on your blockers. It's very difficult for yellow to remove multiple blockers because the only removal they have is Thunderbolt. Also, on top of this, if you are playing Krieg, I would try to Krieg immediately, because usually the only blockers they run, again, are Brûlée. So if they're not ready for it, taking a double attack from Krieg is gonna either take a bunch of cards out of their hand to block it, or they're just gonna take the double attack and get really behind in the game. So yeah, I wouldn't necessarily save Krieg for like exactly knocking out 2 cards. If you have the Krieg, just drop him down, Krieg all over them, and then just profit off of that. So honestly, for black, you're just going to want to pray that you don't face yellow in most scenarios. But if you're unfortunate to play against it, the board is pretty much everything. You want to keep a steady board so that you could just keep being aggressive and getting cards out of their hand. Don't be afraid to take the life, because if you're too afraid to take the life, you're gonna run out of cards so quickly. Between you discarding cards, to pop things and use your effects, you're not gonna have a lot of cards in hand. So if they're also burning your life on top of that and you can't use that as a resource, it's gonna be really difficult for you to stay in the game. And then also, if you're playing the CP9 version, blue and O is your best win condition. You are going to want to attack with blue and O. You're gonna want to resummon those Kumadoris and just keep a wide board in general. And then also save those Fukuros for the late game survival. I say Fukuro, but I really mean like Fukuro and Borsalino, especially Borsalino for the late game, because they could always trigger Thunderbolt on you. You can't really play around it since it's based off of cost and not attack like Jet Pistol is. So you're really gonna want to keep hold of those Fukuros to drop down on the late game, and you're gonna want to really just keep up an aggressive board to keep swinging and keep getting cards out of their hand. But in general, this matchup is like pretty unfavorable for you, so it's going to be very difficult. And then if you're playing purple, just play any other color, to be honest. All right, so that's going to be the end of this video today, guys. Thank you all for watching. It's really great to be back and making content again, so make sure to throw those likes and comments down below. And also, if you found any strategies to work against yellow, make sure to put those also down in the comments down below, just to help everyone get better at the game. But yeah, we're almost at 2K subs, and I want to do something very special for you guys at 2K subs, so make sure that if you're not subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe. We're going to do something really cool for you guys when we hit that 2K mark. But yeah, that's going to be the end of this video today, guys. Thank you all for watching, and as always, good luck in anything you're doing, whether that be work, school, any career stuff, and I'll see you on the next one.